All right, we're back with another holiday chat, and I'm here with a secret agent. We got Buyer 007. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So obviously, Buyer 007 is an alias. We're keeping today's guests anonymous. So why don't you start off by giving us a little bit of background in what it is you are trying to do in you're
Sure.
looking for a business. You want to do a search. Give us some background about yourself and what you're looking for.
Absolutely. So I have been in the corporate world for 20 plus years,
Hmm.
did various management roles, worked through the ranks. I'm at a point where you can say, burnt out. And I've been thinking of doing something on my own from last few years. And now I've made up my mind. I've been in the process. I took the Business Buyer Advantage course,
Hmm.
which was really helpful. I've been doing a lot of research. And the challenge that I'm facing right now is I know what I want to do, I've got the right knowledge. And when I actually go out to search for the business, that's where I'm hitting a brick wall.
Okay.
I've been trying to go through this listings on Biz Buy Sell, and half of those listings are useless.
Hmm.
Nothing comes out of that. So I needed some advice on what is the right way to go about looking for the business opportunity that makes sense for you,
Hmm.
and is there something wrong I'm doing in this process?
What do you know? What kind of business you want to buy?
uh, i have I have some industries shortlisted. I know I home health is one of the preferred space, but I don't want to restrict myself, so I'm open for other service businesses. I know what I don't want. I don't want capital intensive. I don't want
Hmm.
restaurant sort of business. I don't feel confident that I can run it.
Okay.
But I have some options open. I know what's a size. I'm looking for an STE of at least 300K. Um, and I am in one of the big cities in Texas, so I know what area, what size, and have a general idea of industry as well.
Okay.
But that's where I'm stuck, David.
When you say you want an SDE of 300,000, is that because you want to take home that much money, or do you
No.
understand that debt service and everything comes out of that?
Oh, yeah, yeah, of course. I've
Okay.
been through the course, David. And
Okay.
you did a great job in telling all that. So, I understand this depreciation, there's taxation,
Okay.
interest payment, and all that, right?
Okay.
So,
So so tell me, so right now you've been looking for certain industries. You mentioned home healthcare. You've been going onto websites like Biz Buy Sell, and you said half of the listings are useless. Can you give me some examples of some of your recent
so here,
experiences?
here's what is happening, David. One, unlike, when you go to buy a house, you see when the listing was made, right?
Yeah.
On these websites, you don't see that. All you see is, was it in last 3 days or 7 days, 30 days, and that's it, right? So few strange things have happened. I have shown interest in listing, and I got a response immediately saying, listen, this is off the market, but people try to sell me franchises, new franchises, which I'm not interested in. This has happened more than twice, so it's not a coincidence.
Yeah. Okay.
It's some sort of thing going on there where people will put really attractive businesses with attractive numbers. You reach out to them and they tell you, "Hey, this is gone, but let's talk. What do you want?" Right? Then I have gone through other cases where I never got any reward. There has been a case few times people told me this is already gone. You're too late.
Uh-huh.
So either it's high demand going on, or this is I'm not looking at the right place. I'm not sure what's going on there.
Let me ask you this. Are you just looking for a business in your city, or are you open to moving?
Open to nearby cities.
Okay.
Open to moving as well, actually, because the most important thing for me, David, is the numbers needs to work out. It has to
Hmm.
be a profitable, very well established business. as a first time buyer, I don't want to take a risk of buying something which I can't scale up because obviously first 5 years, as I learned, is very high risk of business failure. So
Yeah.
I am looking for things that have crossed that threshold, have reached certain threshold in terms of scaling, and gives a certain STE 300 to 500, maybe 600, that range.
Okay.
And if everything works out, yeah, not open to even moving out.
So, I mean, the advantage of looking at an online business for sale website like Biz by Sell is that the businesses are for sale. So the owners have decided that they want to sell.
Hmm.
Um, Not everything that goes up for sale ends up on those websites. So, given the fact that you're in a specific city, have you ever thought of taking a look and trying to build a list or figure out who all the different business brokers are in your city, in your community?
I started that, David. I started that about 10 days back. So
Okay.
I haven't done much work on that, but that's the direction I got from someone who kind of advised me. So
Yeah.
I've started that process, but not done that yet.
The the issue with the online marketplaces, and I mean, you hit on one of them where people have more than once people have told you that a business wasn't available, but hey, do you want to buy a franchise? Is that, you know, number one, anyone can put anything up there by paying a small fee. And so a business owner could decide on their own to list a business for sale themselves and put it up there. Um, but when something goes up there, like the reason why somebody put an attractive listing with good numbers up there for you is because they were trying to create flows of inquiries for themselves, right? And they were looking to sell a franchise. But if you have a good business that's reasonably priced, and I help clients who want to sell do this, we'll set up an ad and we'll put it on a website like Biz by Sell.
Hmm.
And we can get dozens or 100 inquiries very quickly because there are a lot of people on there looking for businesses of different types. And they're obviously going to be attracted to something that looks reasonable, right? And so a lot of business brokers understand this because they've lived through it and they've had the deluge of inquiries from people from all over. And so if a business broker gets a new listing and they already know someone who might be a qualified buyer or they already have in their database of buyers someone that has expressed interest in that kind of business, a lot of business brokers will try to sell it before they put it onto a site like that. And so there can be because you're talking about a geographical area and maybe the area around the city, there can be a real advantage for you to actually create relationships with the brokers if you want to look at businesses that are put up for sale and try to get ahead of the crowd of competing buyers that are going to come from a site like that.
Got it, David. Very good advice.
Yeah. Now here's the thing about brokers. And there was another holiday chat caller who asked a lot about their search and when they come out you'll probably be very interested to listen to that one too. But
Hmm.
not every broker is taking full advantage of you know, CRM systems or technology to keep track of their buyers. And so you may have to create a program or make an effort on your own to circle back and keep touching base with brokers every so often to remind them of who you are and what you're looking for. Like
Got it.
you can't just meet them one time and then expect that when they get a business for you in a year and a half's time that they're going to call you right up because if they're not organized enough, they'll have forgotten you.
Fair enough, David. That's a great advice. And I've started to work on a sort of a one-pager buyer profile,
Hmm.
and maybe it'll help me send it to the brokers and say, hey, this is who I am, this is my requirement. Let
Hmm.
me know if you have something, and maybe touch base with them at certain frequency.
Yeah, and I would really try to get on the phone. Like you want to
Okay.
escalate the degree of conversation.
Hmm.
So an email might you might send out an email that says, "Hey, I'd like to talk with you on the phone about some of your listings." And when you speak with them, talk with them about their practice and what kind of businesses they typically sell, to get a feel of whether or not they're likely to get something that could be of interest to you. You can send them the one pager bio that you put together about yourself. They're going to want you to sign an NDA and maybe gather some information about you to keep in their records or whatnot. Um, if at all possible, especially if they have a bunch of listings that might interest you, try to escalate it to a face-to-face meeting. Go and
Okay.
meet them and really create a relationship with that person.
And David, any advice on like how to find the right brokers? Obviously, there's going to be a ton of them on if I go on internet,
Well,
and there's no
well,
way for me to kind of
th- th-
decide.
there's not going to be as many as you think, right?
Hmm.
Even in a city with millions of people, there's only going to be a certain number of offices, and so there are some big franchise brands like Sunbelt and Transworld. And if there's a Transworld office, they might have several people in there working as business brokers, and presumably, and you might have to ask, when you talk to one broker in that office, they're going to be able to tell you about and show you all the different listings that the office has available.
Got it.
So, so yeah, I mean, even in pretty big cities with millions of people, it isn't usually that many business brokers as business operations, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Got it.
Um, Now, your idea of your target industry, you mentioned home healthcare, for example. What were some of the other ones on your short list?
Other one was, well, I've been exploring few things. There's like some sort of service business like insulation, right?
Hmm.
One example, home insulation, or it could be home or it could be uh, commercial, right? That was another one. Uh, well, other than that, no, I do not have. I've been keeping my industry option a little bit open, David, simply because one, my experience is more of a management experience and not specific to a particular industry.
Okay.
And two, uh, two that given that I'm looking at a very specific size, scalability, and numbers, so and a geographical area. So I want to definitely keep at least the industry option broader, so that I don't miss out on that. Pet
Okay.
care is something else which interested me simply because it has a huge potential. It is growing, but I don't know whether there will be something meaningful out there. So those are two, three areas. But I think what I know is I'm not looking for, like, for example, there was a listing of print business. I evaluated it and I realized it doesn't make sense because it's very capital intensive. And, you have to buy these, keep modernizing, buy expensive or lease expensive equipment. So it didn't make sense. I looked at Amazon FBA. It didn't make sense to me. I thought
Hmm.
it's like it's very, either you get rich quickly or you lose all your money. So don't want to do that. Most of the Amazon businesses were created literally in last 2 3 years, right? And they can go down as fast as they got created. So
I
drop that
know
idea.
I know someone who's been very successful with Amazon FBA, and what I'm told is that many of the businesses that are sold as Amazon FBA businesses really aren't a business; they're just some SKU items. So certain
Correct.
products.
Correct. Exactly.
To really be a business, you have to have a system in place for the innovation and the creation of new things. So as your products fall out of favor, maybe over the course of time, you've got new products that are coming out all the time. And I think there were some big aggregators who bought up a bunch of those small FBA companies, and now they've run into trouble.
Yeah, you're right. So I think that's where I have been like crossing out few of the industries and shortlisting few, but I'm not at a point, David, where I say this is exact industry I want to be. And that's a question actually. You can advise me on that. Should I be like getting down to that point where I say I absolutely only want to look at these two industries? Will that help me narrow down with my search, or will that create too
Well,
many constraints?
here's the issue with not being focused on an industry. Um, is that every time you look at a new business in a new industry, you then have to engage in a learning curve of understanding that industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so you mentioned capital equipment, right? So in some industries, the capital investment is going to be different than in other industries. And this is going to be related to how much wear and tear the equipment gets, mileage on vehicles, that kind of thing. And capital reinvestment occurs after the SDE or EBITDA level of cash flow. And so um, people can really get into trouble if they don't understand what those capital demands are going to be for equipment and machinery in a business. But you mentioned insulation. So uh, in a home healthcare business, for example, you have a lot of labor, right? You've got the people that are
Correct.
working in other people's homes. In the insulation business, you've got material costs and direct labor, and then you've got overhead labor, like your administrative staff and maybe your sales staff are part of your administrative labor. And so those two businesses could have their P&L set up in a different way with different things in the cost of goods sold, direct expenses versus overheads. And so I've seen people who will not be familiar with an industry start to look at the financial information on a business that's for sale. And because they aren't familiar with the conventions in that industry of how people look at those businesses, they'll lead themselves into confusing situations and they'll sort themselves out, hopefully, before they close a deal. Although I've met people who haven't, um, but they'll just waste a lot of time, right? And so the great thing about choosing one industry or maybe a couple of analogous industries, like, you know, a company that does window installation and siding is very analogous to a company that puts new roofs on people's houses, right? They're very similar in a lot of respects. If you if you learn about that industry and then you look at several businesses within that industry or very closely related businesses, what you then
Mm-hmm.
start to do is you start to create your own database of comparison data. So you can really start to analyze these businesses far more quickly because you've seen others like it. And what it does is it makes you faster and better at your initial triage. And the initial triage is important because that's where you make a determination about whether something is even remotely interesting to you or not. And this is where you save a bunch of your time.
Got it, David. Thank you. Thank you for the advice.
Yeah. And so, you know, you mentioned a couple of things like you want an established long-term, business that's been around for a long time, past the 5-year mark. You're looking for something that is not capital intensive, so a service business. What were some of the other criteria? There was a revenue criteria. You wanted over 300,000 of SDE. What were the other
Mhm.
ones?
So, other one is hopefully some seller finance available. That's not a hard one though. But more than the financing, it's about skin in the game I'm looking for. So
Okay.
even if it is a small percentage, that's okay.
So that's a deal
Uh,
characteristic rather than an
Correct.
industry characteristic. What were
That's a
some of the,
deal characteristics. That's right.
yeah.
From an industry characteristic perspective, it's basically, yeah, I think pretty much the ones you covered. Uh, that's where
Okay.
I am. Service
So,
business, STE, not capital intensive, should not be highly technical, right? Like for example, uh, like if it's highly technical and it takes a very long time to learn. I think uh, that's not what I'll be interested in,
okay. So,
right?
so what you're describing is you're describing in general terms an industry that may have a hard time creating some kind of competitive moat. Like, what's nice about
Mm.
expensive capital equipment is not
Mm-hmm.
everyone wants to make the investment,
Got it. Yeah.
right? And so, a septic pumping company that has trucks that cost $500,000 or more each,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that becomes a barrier to entry,
Entry barrier is high. Yeah.
right? And so some of the things that you're trying to avoid do have certain attractive aspects to them. Um, when you're looking at those high cash flowing service businesses, they're the easiest businesses to start, and they probably have the most people chasing after them as far as buyer competition. And so these are the things that kind of add to some of the problems that you may be seeing.
That's a great perspective, David. I didn't think about uh, that. So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So, but if you like, I would add some more characteristics to your list.
Hmm.
So, for example, who does the business serve? Are you looking for a business that serves homeowners, the government, other businesses? So that would
I'm
be.
looking for B2B,
Mhm.
or, well, in case of home health, it is B2C, if you think about it. So
Okay.
yeah, that I haven't probably given enough thought about it.
Okay. And so B2B, or in the case of home health, would there be government programs or insurance companies involved there sometimes as well?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. So it
Yeah.
is home health has two components, right? There's non-medical and there's medical, and then
Hmm.
there's personal pay versus insurance pay, or government pay, right? So
Okay.
ideally, a healthy mix would be more diversified in my mind. I don't
Okay.
want to go with like a smaller. Uh, I don't want to go with the very specific uh, business only, because then that creates more. Like for example, the most competition would be the personal pay non-medical, right? There's no, to your point, very less entry barrier to get into that versus a medical which requires higher skilled staff, more investment, hiring people who at a higher wages will have a slightly higher barrier.
So when we're thinking about the customers we want to serve, one of the reasons why I wanted to direct the conversation there is because then you can start to think about things like terms of payment. So are you looking for a business, for example, where people pay cash, or where there are receivables typically, right? So more people are interested in a cash-based business where, customers pay at the point of delivery. So if you think about um, HVAC contracting companies, for example, when they go to a home to go do service for a homeowner, typically the homeowner will give them a check or use a credit card and pay them when the service is done. But when that same contractor goes and fixes a machine at the grocery store, they might have to wait 30 or 45 days to get paid, right? So
Yep.
thinking about what kind of um, cash conversion cycle you're open to is another business characteristic. The When we think about the customers, there's a couple of different business formats we typically see. We see businesses that sell to a vast array of sort of lower ticket customers. So, you may have a business that has hundreds of customers that are calling you once or twice a year or using you just a little bit. Or you can have a business that has a higher degree of concentration, but maybe you're more tightly integrated into your customers' affairs. The business with more customers is more of a marketing driven business, relying on advertising and branding and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the business that has a small select number of customers is more of a sales driven kind of business, where there's going to be relationships between the business and those other counterparties, the customers. right? So that's another kind of aspect or characteristic that we look at when we talk about a business. And so if you think about, and then you turn the other way and look at the supply side, right? There are businesses that have more supplier concentration. There are businesses that sell or stock a very few number of items or provide a very limited number of services. And there's businesses that sell a wide variety of products and services. So if you think about all those different things that go on in a business, you may be able to create a tighter set of industry criteria that would describe the kind of business that you might be looking for. And then once you have that criteria, um, there's a couple of things you can do with it. You can start to use it as a better triage tool when you're looking at a website like BizBuySell
Hmm.
or talking with brokers, for example. But you can also use that list of criteria. And I don't know if you remember this from the course, but there was an exercise I call the yellow pages exercise, where
Yes.
you look at, I always say the yellow pages or any other kind of comprehensive list of industries like the SIC code list or the NAICS code list, that the government uses to classify industries. And you take your criteria and you start to read the list, or in the yellow pages, you read the headings in the yellow pages, and you just ask yourself, does this kind of business meet my criteria? And as you work your way through that list, what most people who've done this have discovered is they've uncovered industries that they never really thought of or considered before that actually meet their criteria. And then you can do a little investigation. You can look for books or YouTube channels or websites or blogs about those industries and kind of learn a little bit more about them. And you can uncover sometimes some types of businesses that you weren't really coming front of mind for you before.
That's a great advice, David. Thank you. You have given me some homework. I'm going to go back and put together the characteristics uh, and look at all the aspects and then perhaps uncover something new, which I'm not thinking right now.
Yeah. Well, if you decide to completely focus on one kind of business, like if you say, I absolutely have to own, I don't know, a forklift service company. Well, when people get focused to that degree, then I usually tell
Mhm.
them to just go meet all the owners of those companies, because when you have it so precisely defined, it's easier to go out and do what they call a proprietary search, which is just to go out and start talking to companies directly. There is value in looking at things that are listed by business brokers because, like I said, those people have demonstrated their desire to sell, and presumably they've gone through an effort of preparing the business and getting information together for the broker to get ready. Um, yeah, and there's a wide variety, of course, of competency amongst people in the broker community too. So there's going to be pluses and minuses there. But when you booked this call, I think you asked a question maybe about franchises too, didn't you?
I did, and I was about to get to that question. I have
Okay,
actually three more questions. So
sure.
let me start with the franchisee question. So my thought process, David, is you can guide me on this one, but my thought process is as a first-time business owner, although I have more than 2 decades of management experience, operational, financial, people management, right? I feel confident about running the business, but this is still the first time, right? And
Mhm.
one of the things, if there's a established franchisee coming for resale, so the advantages of that for someone like me is you get an ecosystem, you get some guidance, you get some coaching, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, there are some disadvantages also. You will end up paying higher royalties, so that impacts your margins. There might be some growth restriction because of areas, etc. Right? But
Mhm.
at least my thought process was the risk of failure is less when it's an established business, and risk of failure should be even more less logically if it's an established franchisee because that is even that has even more support system. So is am I right in thinking that uh, from a risk perspective, going with the well-established, profitable franchisee business is better than a non-franchisee one? I'm not comparing with the new business, but like equal businesses which have been around for equal length of time.
Yeah. So I think that if you're going to buy a franchise, buying a resale offers you the best of both worlds, like you said, because you can get to analyze the financial performance of that one location, and you get to make an offer to buy the business based on the performance of that location. The the big difference between a franchise system and an independent business is the guardrails that keep you in a certain set of actions or behaviors, the system itself, right?
Hmm.
And there are good franchises and there are franchises that are kind of challenged out there. Um, I know several families who are very, very wealthy because they are involved in franchise brands. And they've done very well with those names and they've made a lot of money and they've been very successful. There's one in particular I'm thinking about, and they own multiple locations of a franchise, and their family has had this for several decades. And I know that they have done well with it, but then there were times when the franchisor changed hands, and then some of the advantages were eroded. And so, but one of the issues that can happen in a franchise system is that you can lock yourself into a franchise agreement over a long period of time, and everything can be absolutely fantastic when you join. But
Hmm.
things can change over time, and you know won't necessarily have any kind of control or remedy for that. What a lot of big companies are always seeking continuous growth. And so, in the case that I'm thinking about with this family, the franchisor got bought out by a big private equity operation, and they were focused on growth, 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 growth every quarter. And so, what they started to do is they started to reduce the head office staff and they started to reduce the level of services they were providing to the franchise owners, and they were starting to reduce some of the supports that they had in place. But of course, the royalties didn't go down, right? And
Hmm.
so they saw this evolution change over the course of time that they were owners in this network. And I've heard other stories from people like that too. And so I think what you really have to do when you analyze a franchise is you have to ask yourself, what do I get for the fees that I'm paying? And so if you're in a franchise network and they are doing significant head office functions for you, taking care of marketing, taking care of product development, new services, um, you know, that kind of stuff. If you think about, um, the franchise everyone knows, McDonald's, right? So
Hmm.
the head office is doing all kinds of marketing activities. They're sponsoring major sporting events. They're doing all this television advertising. They're coming up with a new, regional flavor by season for different kinds of sandwiches and special offers. All of that innovation, creativity, all of that stuff. It's hard, if not impossible, for an individual burger restaurant owner to do that kind of thing just with their own creativity in their own spare time, right? So the franchisees within the McDonald's network, they get a tremendous value from being part of that system. That's what you have to look at because there are plenty of franchises out there that don't really deliver a lot of value at all. And I think that in addition to looking at the individual location, if you want to buy a resale, you have to do a good deal of due diligence on the franchise system itself. And this is
Hmm.
why in most places there is a franchise disclosure document, an FDD, and it not only discloses things like the franchise agreement, but it also discloses financial statements of the franchisor. And it talks about, locations that have closed recently or the number of locations over the course of time, for example, because you need to be able to assess the health of the franchise system. You could end up in a bad spot if the franchisor fails in some way. And I've seen this firsthand in one example. I looked at a franchise disclosure document for a client, and I read through, and there were disclosures in there about the franchisor, so their financial statements were in there. And this was a franchise that had been really popular at one time, growing quickly to almost a couple hundred locations. And
Mm-hmm.
then the market kind of changed, and people didn't really like their product as much. And what this franchisor had done is they had gone out and signed leases with commercial landlords in locations that were ideal locations for their franchise. But as franchisees stumbled and had problems and closed, some of them closed, the landlord just started billing the franchisor because technically they held a head lease or a master lease for that location. So as the expansion stopped and the contraction began, the franchisor suddenly faced a lot of big costs with settling these leases with the commercial landlords. So typically they'd make some kind of payment and get rid of the obligation. But as you can imagine, that put the franchisor under a great deal of stress. Well, another set of financial statements that were in that FDD were for the marketing fund. And so the franchisees were paying a royalty to the franchisor, and they were paying a marketing fee for national advertising into the marketing fund. And when I looked at the financial statements for the marketing fund, what I found was very interesting because I found that their balance sheet assets were growing year after year. And I thought, this is strange. What's going on here? All this entity is supposed to be doing is collecting advertising money from franchisees and then spending it on advertising, right? To promote
Mm-hmm.
the brand.
Yeah.
But when I started to look at the footnotes of those financial statements, it was revealed that the advertising fund was investing in making loans to the franchisor.
Wow. That's
Okay.
messed up.
So what they were doing, because the franchisor managed the marketing fund, what they were doing is they were taking money from the marketing fund to to basically finance losses in the franchisor. And and the person I was working for, the person that was looking at buying one of these franchise locations, said, does this really matter? Because I'm just going to run this store. If those guys go bankrupt, how does it affect me? And I pointed out to him that the franchisor held the head lease on the location he was looking at. And so I said,
Mm-hmm.
if the franchisor goes under, then potentially what can happen is the landlord suddenly could have that lease back. The person named on the lease, the franchisor, will have gone insolvent. And so they don't necessarily have to offer you the location for the same price the franchisor was paying. They'll be able to hold you hostage and ask for whatever amount of money they want, right? And
Got it.
so just all of this uncertainty because of the health of the franchisor. And this is something that most entrepreneurs aren't tuned into because they're so focused on the activity of the location, and they don't necessarily see how things going on system wide can have a material impact on the way the business functions or on what it's going to be like for them. Um, like I said, I've known many people that have done very well with franchises. It's just an the way that I put it is that when you get into a franchise scenario, you can say it one of two ways. Either you don't really own the business, you kind of lease it because you don't control the brand, you don't control the trademarks, you don't control the recipe of the secret sauce or whatever it is. Another way to put it is that you are basically putting yourself under an additional layer of government because they collect a royalty, which is a percentage of your revenue, your income, just like a government collects taxes based on your income. And they create a whole other set of rules for you, and you have to follow those rules. Um, I've known franchise entrepreneurs who got into personal issues with the territory person that enforced the system rules. So they had like a falling out personally with the person that was in charge of making sure that they were compliant with all the terms of the franchise agreement. And then once that personal relationship was kind of on the rocks, then every little thing that happened that, you know, could create an issue all of a sudden was creating an issue. And, some of the franchise agreements can be pretty open about um, creating expenses for you, but requiring that you do updates,
Hmm.
replace things, this kind of thing. So if you go down that route, what I suggest you do is that in addition to looking at the location you're going to buy, is that you actually get out on the road face to face with other people in the franchise network and go and visit them at their location. And
Hmm.
in particular, you want to talk to some people who've been in the system for years. And
Got it.
you want to find out, um, you want to find out how other people are doing. You want to see benchmarking information. You want to know how the location that you're going to buy has compared with other locations, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I uh, I've had a hand in some franchise resales back in my broker days, and it's interesting how some of the franchisors look at resales. Some of them, basically really encourage the seller to help bring the new person on board and train them and everything. Other systems don't want that to happen at all. In fact, they won't even. I've had one situation where a franchisor would not approve any seller financing because they didn't want sellers to have any interest of any kind in the location,
Hmm.
right? And they would make the buyer come and do the same process that any new franchisee has to do. You do a discovery day, you do the training and everything at head office. They wanted that buyer to basically go through the process like any other new franchisee, and just be trained by the head office. Um, and there can be some value in that, um, especially if the location isn't performing quite as well as it should be. I've also seen franchises where the franchisee wasn't following the operations manual, they weren't following the SOPs
Hmm.
properly, and it was having a material impact on their financial performance. And when a new person went in and did the system properly, they immediately had better results.
Got it, David. Thank you for a very explanatory answer. And you're right. My personal experience, I've gone through some FTDs and I've been doing some research, and it exactly tallies because I've looked at a franchisee disclosure document where everything made sense, numbers, they had reported very nicely the average performance, mean revenues, cost of goods sold averages, etc.,
Mhm.
versus others where they had a similar structure, but talking to the seller, I realized that he gets very little value from franchising. Very little value. I mean, they literally don't support him that much, and he's doing stuff on his own, but paying royalties and
Yeah.
marketing fee. So there's a lot of variability out there for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to make sure that you get value for your money. I think I said this a little over a year ago, on a podcast or something. I can't remember when I first imagined it, but at one point, you know, maybe back in the 80s, everyone wanted to be a McDonald's franchisee because it would make them wealthy. And now it seems like everyone wants to be Ray Kroc.
Yeah.
There's so many new franchise brands get started all the
Hmm.
time. And I
That's
saw
right.
a television report about a bunch of people that unfortunately had lost money by investing in a new franchise concept. This was in Western Canada, but it was a like this one pizzeria was operating and people liked it. And then they went out and tried to franchise this pizzeria concept. And the person actually succeeded in finding 5 or 6 people willing to invest money in buying this franchise concept. And the news article was one of these consumer protection kind of articles where they were, talking about how, these poor people had invested this money and didn't get what they were supposed to get. But I was thinking about it from a business point of view, and I was thinking, who would put up money to buy a franchise concept that had only ever worked in one
Only
place?
only one story. Yeah.
You know, like in my mind, you'd want to see real repeated evidence that the system works well in a variety of locations and markets, um, and have some kind of track record behind it.
Yeah. And another interesting thing I noticed is a franchisee will say that they have been in business for since last 25 years. And then you realize they only have like 50 stores in the entire country. And then they tell you, oh, yes, we have been in business for 25 years, but we started franchising 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So,
Yeah.
so that's what I found out recently. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of the pizzeria example was a little extreme version of that, but that happens.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, please go.
Oh no, I was just going to say, but and then there are franchises out there that have been around for 30 or 40 years with hundreds of locations. And what the challenge that those ones face is, the need to remake themselves every once in a while to keep themselves current and relevant, right?
They expanded too fast, and then they try to figure out how to move forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is helpful. David. Another thing I wanted some advice on is if I get through the initial phase of something which I'm interested in and I want to move forward, I think going back to building your team part of your course, right?
Hmm.
So I would definitely need, in most cases, I've seen with the small businesses, accounting is all over the place. So I ideally should need an accountant to do the financial due diligence.
Hmm.
And it could be uh advisor from a business perspective, but definitely an accountant plus an advisor plus a lawyer, right? So
Hmm.
how do I go about finding the right, like, especially accountant? Like,
Hmm.
how do I find accountants who can do this kind of work? Because normally you don't find freelance accountant that often. Then maybe freelance lawyers are more easier to find than freelance accountants. So I'm asking this question purely because there was a business which where I got very interested in.
Hmm.
I didn't end up uh, moving forward for different reasons, but at that point, I was like looking for someone who can do the financial due diligence, and I wasn't sure what's the right way to find it.
Yeah. So for a business that is big enough, there are firms that do what are called quality of earnings reports. And these are can be expensive. It's a lot of work. For really small businesses or simpler businesses, then a due diligence effort that is led by the buyer with the help of someone like an accountant is going to be good enough. Um, what is happening right now in the world of accounting is a bit of a revolution, and we can thank the events of 2020 for this, because prior to 2020, most accountants, even though they used computers for almost everything they did, were really running these local businesses where most of their clients existed around them, within a reasonable driving distance. And most accountants had offices, even if clients never ever went there. Right. And after 2020, when the whole remote work thing became more popular, what I'm seeing now is that increasingly accountants are starting to run these remote businesses, which means they've suddenly, many of them have become national service firms. And the way that they're competing now is by choosing industry silos. And so the right accountant to help you take a look at a business that's for sale is an accountant that has other clients in the same industry, because that accountant is going to have familiarity with what the books should look like and what kinds of things should be appearing in them, and can even, take a peek at their other clients' books and tell you if something is really off from a ratio perspective, you know, like the cost of goods sold margin or things like that. And so this is another reason why choosing an industry can be so valuable, because once you decide on a certain type of business, then that's another thing you can be asking accountants when you go out to find someone to help you through this process. Is you can say, do you have any experience in this industry? Do you have clients right now in this industry?
Got it. And David, what's the best way to find, like, what are the resources I can leverage to find such accountants? Is it more like sites like, um, where you can find freelancing people, or is there specific
Yeah, I wouldn't
um,
necessarily go
those-
looking on, Upwork or something like that for this kind of person. I would be looking for an accounting firm, because the firm that helps you do this analysis and due diligence and digs into things for you a little bit, ideally they're going
Mhm.
to become the firm that files your annual tax returns or does financial statements for you. Um,
Got it.
yeah,
So
you
accounting firms would normally do this work, help, and then because they also want the business eventually, right? Got it.
well, not every accounting firm is going to. And so
Hmm.
this is why you really need to find someone before you have the deal at hand. So,
Okay,
90% of accountants, all they ever do is tax returns and financial statements. And so the subset of accountants, CPAs who want to help with due diligence and look at a business is going to be a little bit smaller.
got it. So I should have ideally already found someone. So maybe I should start that process,
Mhm.
because my thought process was, or maybe industry first. Let me give more diligence on industry basis your feedback, and then look for an account.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I mean, I interviewed an accountant based in New England who is now working nationally with people that are doing like online retail. And they have
Mhm.
clients in this space all across the country. And that's just one example of
Mhm.
how that industry is starting to develop into these silos of industry category.
Got it. Uh, I think there's one last question I have, David.
Sure.
We have few minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So I think it's so the last question I had is, and the concept of partner, right? Right now, I'm in a full-time job and I make more than 200K at this
Hmm.
point in time. And my reasons of getting into a business is less financial independence and more of a, I would say, a burnout, right?
Hmm.
But obviously my partner is a little bit high. So I have to, and that's why I'm looking for a specific SD. I can't go below that. I need I need to make a certain amount of money, even if it is slightly less than what I make today.
Hmm.
So is buying a business harder for someone with a higher partner? And any specific suggestions you have for how do I go about searching this?
So I think there's probably, BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. And you are looking strictly at the financial numbers, the income that you have,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, that is actually right.
Yeah. So I would say that there's a certain part of the BATNA that you need to add because you're not considering this.
Hmm.
You mentioned that if you continue to do the work you're doing, you face a burnout.
Hmm.
And so over the years, I've had many people who earn really high salaries who I've helped to buy businesses where they would earn less, but they would have a much better life. And so this is something that you need to add onto that BATNA is the mental stress or, all of the health, potential health problems that could arise from continuing to do what you're doing. And so when you think about it from that point of view, I once helped a person who was a C-suite executive in Chicago buy a fly fishing camp in the mountains, and his income was going to go down by half. But
Hmm.
there was another two items on his comparison chart, and that was that sweet C-suite job in Chicago involved, an hour of commuting each way, twice a day. And it also had this intense mental pressure. And when he got his, fishing lodge in the mountains, um, he got a much better work-life balance and was able to remove a lot of those stresses. And he did that deal. So what that would mean, that what it literally means is that that change of life held $150,000 of value for him.
That's a great perspective, David. Thank you.
Yeah. People throughout history have quit stressful jobs to go and do something easier, simpler, less stressful. And so it's not a business decision. It's a life decision. And so, there's all kinds of thoughts or inputs that are going to have to go into that about what makes sense, et cetera. But that's the kind of thing that you need to think about. And the other thing too is that just because you buy something that's a little bit smaller that doesn't give you quite the same income, um, once it's yours and you control it and all of your efforts go to your own benefit, you can find yourself excited, by the opportunity. It can become
Hmm.
invigorating and interesting to you. And if you choose a business that can be grown, sometimes it doesn't take that long to get your income back up to where it was before. And
Yep.
so I would call that an investment of time. You consider the down payment you're going to make to buy a business, your investment of money, spending a year or two with a lower income, that's just an investment of time.
Yep. Makes sense, David.
Yeah. Awesome, buyer
I
007. It's it's
think
almost like you're related to James Bond.
I this is like my creativity 1 minute before jumping onto this car. Trying trying to think, oh, I don't want to reveal my name. So, anyways,
All
thank you
right.
so much, David. It has been really, really helpful. Gave me a lot of perspective
No
and
problem.
some refreshing I needed to continue
Awesome.
with my search.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And I hope you have a great holiday season with some time with family and friends.
You too, David. Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.